Excellent connection. Good, good. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite, the uniting of the fake accents, the one accent to rule them all sort of stream that we've got going on here. I'm joined as always by my co-host, the Britisher, and I hope that you're all well. Good evening, Britisher. How are you?
Well, good evening. It's good to be here in the home of the Accent Federation.
The Accent Federation, the Accent Union. Oh no,
the Accent Axis. We could be the Axis powers, the Accent powers,
the Allied accents. I don't know. I can't combine the word allied and accent in any way that is reasonable, but the Axis powers is just a terrifying concept that I never wish to revisit, if I'm perfectly honest. But no, how long have we been doing this now? It's been a little while, hasn't it?
It's been a while. Yes, it's been a fair while.
It feels like just the other day we were talking about.
We started talking about tea one day. And
tea.
It went from there.
You told me that this would never work. No one could possibly talk about tea for any substantial amount of time. And 3.5 hours.
And then I went on for about 3 hours. Yes.
3.5 hours later, there we were. Hello to everyone in the chat. I can see BurnZ3210, long-time viewer of the chat, and the source of some of the tech for the stream. Thanks ever so much for stopping by. Lil AOT Aroa, I haven't seen you in a little while. Nice to see you there. And Object of Hate, who still has the wrench of the mighty moderator. Not that I feel that my chat particularly needs moderating. It's been a long time since we were spammed by communists. But yes, it's been a strange week, really, hasn't it? I mean, we were just talking prior to the stream about Scotch eggs of all things, and I appreciate that this doesn't seem to have much of a connection to the events of the week. But in terms of what we are going to talk about this evening, which is going to be about Britishness in some way, shape or form, it may interest those of you in the chat to know that Scotch eggs are not Scottish. Did you know this before I had mentioned it, Britisher?
Oh, of course, I am the font of all knowledge. No, I had absolutely no idea. I think I actually, in the conversation as it developed, I was actually the one who said, did we fob this off on the Scots because we didn't want to admit to it? And then you came out with the story about how it apparently was a Yorkshire creation. And it was someone called Scott who popularised it in Yorkshire.
Indeed, although Fortnum and Mason does claim to have invented the Scotch egg as early as...
Well, now I have serious problems believing that.
As early as 1738, you see. However, they base it on archival material since lost. So, whilst they may have popularised the Scotch egg as a hamper item, and so on, it's actually I don't think so. I think it's something they probably appropriated.
To me, the Scotch egg is just a bit too laddish. It's a bit too builder's yard. Whereas Fortnum and Masons are about as posh as you can get.
Just a tad. So there's a claim that Londoners invented it after the officers of the Scots Guards near Wellington Barracks. However, according to Culinary Delights of Yorkshire, they originated in Whitby in Yorkshire in the 19th century, but were originally covered in fish paste rather than sausage meat, named after William J. Scott and Sons, who sold and ate them. But, as I mentioned, this date doesn't fit with the known use of the term earlier, 75 years earlier. In fact, it has been suggested they were originally called scorch eggs because they were cooked over an open flame before being deep fried in lard.
But you see, this entire story of the Scots Guards, I mean, that's not at all believable. If any military, if any area of the military invented the Scotch egg, surely it was the Royal Artillery.
Do tell.
Well, just think of the shape.
You think it was an early attempt to to create some kind of edible firing shot. So, you know, the Royal Artillery is so clearly obsessed with firing things out of cannons, it would make sense that if they could create a meal that could not let me finish. That not only could be fired into the open mouths of its own countrymen, but also could be cooked in the fires of the gunpowder used to fire it, saving on costs for the British military.
Yeah.
I think
I think we've solved this riddle, haven't we?
So apparently this the Scotch egg.
Well, it would be another way of scorching an egg, wouldn't it?
It would be indeed. Although I think that we are probably in the realms of fanciful thought here rather than anything realistic.
Never.
On this show? Surely not. According to YouGov, Scotch eggs were found to be among Britain's least liked foodstuffs in 2019, ranking alongside Bubble and Squeak, Beef Wellington, Lancashire Hot Pot, pork pies, steak and kidney pies in the lowest tier of British foods, 50 to 59% in favour. So over half of people still like these, but they are considered to be in the low tier. The only foods which ranked worse were steak and kidney pudding, black pudding, kippers, liver and onions, haggis, faggots, laverbread, and jellied eels. Now,
okay, jellied eels I can understand.
Okay.
Come on, let's be honest.
Jellied eels, kippers to some extent, they're a very, very strong flavour. And you know, the concept of fried kippers in the morning for breakfast.
I quite like kippers just as long as we make sure they haven't got any bones in them. The one thing that really puts me off if I have to stop picking through them to try find bone.
Indeed.
But other than that, I quite like kippers. But when it comes to the jellied eels, I mean, the jellied eels are very much associated with Cockney, aren't they? They're the East End of London.
I will openly admit here, I've never tried a jellied eel. The very idea of it repulses me on many levels.
Yes, but there is a note of interest here. Insofar that the eels consumed tended to come from Northern Ireland.
Are you confusing that with the Northern Irish?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm not confusing eels with the Northern Irish. No, but yes. Now with the whole Brexit thing. I don't know whether there was some sort of exception or whatever, but there is in Europe they effectively enjoy protected status. Oh, that's it. Yes, I think they can't be sold to another jurisdiction as such because they enjoy protected status. So, because we are now technically in a separate jurisdiction from the Northern Irish, who are now basically part of the European whatever it is that I can't think of right now. What is it? The customs regime, isn't it?
Customs union.
They are now the eels now fall under European protection because they are no longer effectively within the same sphere as we are. Because the border now lies within the Irish Sea and not on the Republic and province border. So, yes, getting eels from Northern Ireland to London is now impossible.
This is one concession I am quite willing to make. I mean,
how many Cockneys there actually are who are eating jellied eels? I don't know. I mean, it must have withered somewhat, mustn't it?
Well,
I don't think there are too many pearly queens in the East End of London anymore.
I mean, I know that there are several sort of classic British pubs that rely on them. You know, especially pie shops. You know, that serve excuse me, serve old British cuisine. They do all the pies, the handmade, very very much kind of fast food, but not fast food. If you catch my drift, and with the chippies and jellied eels are part of that, alongside pickled eggs and all the rest. So it's a strange one. I have no desire to eat one. The idea of the texture seems horrific. I have no idea what an eel would taste like, but the flesh doesn't look like it would be particularly tender, and it's not a pleasant animal to consider consuming, I suppose. And forgive me, anyone who really adores the jellied eel in today's.
I am very much in the same terrain. There are certain things I just don't want to go near as foods. And this involves, by the way, the whole insect malarkey, where they're trying to tell us to kind of consume them because it's good for the planet. But also, the idea of various organs that you just go, no, tripe. I've never really been keen on the idea of eating tripe.
Tripe is tripe is, again, it's a very strong flavour, right? So you don't want to be eating. I mean, I've always found it's much more something that you would feed to animals. You would feed it to the dog. You wouldn't because it's cheap as well. You wouldn't have it for yourself. But I am surprised that a number of these meals have made their way onto the super disliked
I think
category.
The steak and kidney pie, I think, is the large surprise there.
Steak and kidney pudding is and steak and kidney pies. I mean, both of them are absolutely delicious meals, especially if cooked right. Very, very, very rich. So people who don't know, it's a suet pudding. So it's a savoury meal with what is essentially a slow-cooked steak pieces and other assorted offal, including kidney. And with a very rich beef gravy with it, because it all comes out when you make it. And then that is contained within this kind of very heavy pastry pudding. So you would have either a small sort of individually portioned one, or much more likely in the traditional sense, excuse the sirens outside, in the traditional sense you would have one large one, and then you would cut a slice from it, and then have a big scoop of it on the plate with other vegetables, and it is absolutely gorgeous if done right. As I say, very very rich, so you wouldn't want to have too much of it, but much in the spirit of a lot of great British food. It is, it's designed to be filling. It's the sort of thing that working men had to sate them, either at the beginning of or at the end of a long day.
I mean, before we came on air, when you mentioned this, if you recall, I said, whom did they ask? Was this poll conducted in an Asian district of Birmingham? Because beef Wellington was also on the list, wasn't it?
This is, yes. This is a study by, or at least not a study. It's a survey by YouGov, and I'm just going to see if I can find the link to this, which would be 13 ranked along by Kate O'Malley. Apparently haggis is on there as well, which again, the concept of haggis might be off-putting to some, but it is very tasty, especially with potatoes. So it surprises me that it is down that low, especially as it's considered a kind of, it's a novelty food now more than it is a staple. But at the same time,
don't let Tailed Feature hear you say that.
Oh, Tailed Feature eats beans on toast every day, so I just I don't.
I mean, what's wrong with that? Beans on toast is proper British food.
Yes, but
but I think he would take objection to you referring to haggis as a novelty food item.
Well, it is to everyone who isn't Scottish, right? So,
well, there is that.
And this was a Britain-wide poll. So, this is an international YouGov.
What, a Brixton-wide poll? Well, that would explain it.
So, apparently they surveyed 25,000 people across 24 countries. Okay, so this is the beginning part. 24 countries. To find which food was the universally most loved. And before you do it, I people in chat, I want you to put your guesses. What is the most popular internationally? What is the most popular cuisine on the planet? And Britisher, what's your guess?
So, are we talking cuisine or are we talking a dish?
Cuisine. So
cuisine.
So
I would opt for Italian.
Italian, yes. So apparently, Italian cuisine does beat all comers. When asked which of 34 national cuisines they'd tried and whether they liked or disliked them, Italian food scored 84% across 24 nations. Patriotically speaking, of course, the Italians love it the most, with 99% enjoying their national cuisine. So do the Spaniards.
I wonder who that 1% are. Those are the inhabitants that have to go and live in the Vatican, do they?
I see. Or possibly of foreign origin in Italy. Other big fans include the Spaniards, 94% say they like it, and the French, 92%. But who is the least impressed by Italian food? Which nation?
This is of 24 nations.
Of 24 nations.
I think we can assume these are 24 reasonable nations.
Yes.
Not Outer Mongolia or something like that.
No, they are the big players. You would know.
Who is the least impressed? I would guess the French.
The French, 92% like Italian food. They're way up there.
No, I thought they might perhaps be sniffy about it. No, ours is better.
I mean, the French have made a mockery of their cuisine by making peasant dishes, somehow expensive.
Well, in all fairness, much of Italian cuisine is just the same. It's peasant dishes that have been made into, But so to get back to it, who dislikes the Italian cuisine most? Then
I'll give you the percentage. 59% of this nation say that they really enjoy Italian food.
I'm assuming there is some level of irony involved here. So hence I'm.
It's not. You're possibly overthinking it here. Who could possibly be?
Could it be the British?
It is not the British, but it is the Chinese. The Chinese are not big fans. Who would have known that if you take basically the opposite geographical location on the other face of the planet, who are used to a completely different range of recipes, options, etc., who are also quite patriotic themselves, that they would prefer their own cuisine to the Italians. Although you do have to wonder what hand the CCP had in ensuring that all foreign
they're
cuisine...
more than likely just bitter because of that whole Marco Polo story in spaghetti.
Dear. Second place, then. So if Italian is the quintessential international cuisine of choice, who ranks in second? Well, of course, it's China. So
yes,
and I think that's just force of numbers, surely, as much as anything else. They dominate the Asiatic region.
I think they've also colonized. They've sort of colonized the West culinarily, if that is a word, with all their Chinese restaurants.
Yes, entirely true. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but we know ranks 1, 2, and 3 go Italian, Chinese, and then Japanese. But
Japanese
sushi is very popular. So
I'm surprised at that.
Japan is actually the harshest of the food critics. Of the 34 cuisines asked about, 23 scored less than 50% among Japanese respondents. On average, only 39% of the Japanese people who had tried any foreign food at all said they had liked it.
Well, they object to the fact that it was cooked.
Yes, probably. That's fantastic. British cuisine, however, where do we rank? What do you think it is? I'll give you the figure. If you ask native Britons, 91% say we like our own national cuisine. Fewer than half of those. I won't finish that sentence. So, how well liked are we abroad though in terms of?
Well, I mean, we tend to be a bit of a running joke. Largely due to the fact that we neighbour the French. And so I would assume, for example, that the people who score British cuisine lowest are not the Chinese, but the French.
You are quite correct.
Because they just couldn't bring themselves to see it any other way.
Whilst 91% of Britons say we like our own national cuisine, fewer than half of those in mainland Europe agreed. Holding our national dishes in particular disdain are the Germans. What a surprise. The Spaniards.
The Germans, yes.
The Germans, don't mention the war. The Spaniards, the Danes, and the French, of whom only 25 to 28% said they liked it.
The Danes, yes, of course, the Danes. Whom do they sell all that bacon to?
Just at Scowen. And us, yes. Only the Japanese hold our cuisine actually in higher contempt. Only 20% of the Japanese enjoy our food. However, it tends to be more warmly received elsewhere, outside of Europe. The majority of people say they like it in 11 of the 15 non-European countries surveyed, and it's particularly popular in Singapore, where 3/4 say they would try it again. When it comes to Britons ourselves, we put Italian food level pegging with our own national dishes, tied at 91%, followed by Chinese food and then Indian. What a surprise! So that is the way it goes. So
all I can say is, having grown up on the continent, you obviously get to talk to people who are about to go to Britain on holiday and are terribly, terribly worried whether one can eat the food. To the point almost comparable, whereas in the olden days, if you went somewhere, you were wondering whether you could drink the water. As in, is there anything edible over there? And you go, no, don't worry, you'll be fine. And then they come back and they start raving about, and it was so cold and it was raining and then we had this fish and chips.
Yes.
It was fantastic. And you're just sitting there going, yes, yeah, you were the one who were asking me whether you were going to be safe over there with any food, right?
Lots of salt and vinegar on the chips, I must say.
Of course, one of the things they love when they come back, to Europe is, the pubs, it's fantastic, and the atmosphere in these places. But of course also, you can have some beef stew or a pie and some chips and whatever. It's just brilliant. And you're just going, it's funny how the attitude suddenly changes when one is actually. But prior to that, one looks at it and goes, no, British food must be terrible because everybody is saying it's terrible. And because, of course, it's a bit of a sort of, national pride thing.
Here's the
in
worst
Europe,
thing.
Particularly, foods are a very strong identifier of one's national culture and so on, and therefore one also almost much more so than over here, because as you see, we like Italian food, we eat curry, it's no problem with us. We don't identify it so strongly.
No, but we do have a strong national cuisine, but it is again like there's a kind of how should I put this? At least it's the trouble I find is when, for instance, one of my friends who is an immigrant said to me, Britain doesn't have any national foods, does it? And I say, excuse me, you just do not know what you're talking about, my dear. It's one of those things where a lot of the foods that we do have are not things that you would find on any, or typically at least, on a restaurant menu. And because even our pubs, what we consider to be pub grub, are often imports from other places. If you think about a pub which offers, it'll do a curry and chips, it'll do a lasagna. Like, it's hard pressed to find a pub that
chicken in a basket
that won't do that, or chicken in a basket. Yep, all simple things. But it's because a lot of British cuisine, I mean, fish and chips accepted, right, require quite a lot of preparation. And that's because of the kind of, we built food to last as much as anything else. And we built large meals. And we also had this issue where an awful lot of our national cookbook, as it were, was lost. It was lost because we had this little thing called rationing, if you will recall. And so people made foods out of what they could get. So you had this kind of a slight similarity there, and
there was also a difference in so far that we actually relied very much on freshness. So, for example, we call the French the frogs, but they call us les roast beef.
Yes,
because we are the ones who eat roast beef.
Le boeuf.
But why do we just eat roast beef and not have some complicated sauces and whatever with it? Well, because we don't need to disguise the flavour of the beef, because it's actually fresh.
Yes.
And this was seen as one of the historical reasons that the Brits very much love their beef, but they love the flavour of the meat per se, whether it was beef or any other meat. Whereas a lot of other cuisines, I mean, first and foremost, of course, India had a problem with the meat going off pretty quickly, and therefore one needing to, how shall we say, camouflage the flavour a little.
Hence the many spices, indeed. So I'm just gonna run through a list of popular or just general British foods, and for anyone who is not of the good fortune to be British trueborn, or otherwise related to the British, you should appreciate some of these. So we've got Yorkshire pudding is on the god tier. Okay, so the very top, Yorkshire puddings. Now, these come in a variety of sizes, although the miniature Yorkshire pudding is relatively rather a recent invention, I suppose. Because what it was typically was the Yorkshire pudding was it was a replacement for a plate. It's a bowl-sized thing, that you then loaded up with gravy and meat and all those other things. And it's that light pastry that makes a Yorkshire pudding just ever so perfect. And it's a great addition. It's one of my absolute favourites. Then we have, what would typically go with a Yorkshire pudding. We've got the Sunday roast. Now, the Sunday roast is a curious one, Britisher, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but so my family, for instance, has never particularly stuck to the concept of the Sunday roast, as in something that you would have every single Sunday. Is this something that you've observed in your family and friends, etc.?
Well, I have known people who have done it, but sooner or later I think everybody wanes a bit. A, because it is quite, high maintenance.
It's a lot of work.
Yes, but also because it is quite heavy on the calories. You do need to do an awful lot of running in order to get rid of the full Sunday dinner again.
Yes, it's the sort of thing. I know a lot of labourers who still keep to it. Kind of very salt of the earth British working class folk. It contributes a little bit to the rotund nature of a lot of them. But the Sunday roast is a staple of the working class diet, I think.
Well, it's almost a sort of a bit of a miniature Christmas, isn't it? I think at the end of it, you feel pretty much the same after having gone through the Sunday roast as you do having consumed the Christmas dinner. As in, I need to sit down for an hour or two.
Yes. Well, you have two options, don't you? One is you sit down, at which point you're guaranteed to slowly fall asleep. Or secondly, to go on a bracing walk afterwards, usually in the middle of British autumn.
Well,
you
see, there you are different from me, because I am incapable of going on walks, bracing or otherwise.
Trust me,
I've had a really filling meal.
Oh, trust me, I don't want to. But as soon as you get out there and you're talking with someone, usually a family member, then the miles melt away, and you go on a nice jaunt.
I can't help but feel that a really sort of overfilled stomach, together with activity of the sort you suggest, is somewhat precarious. As in, it might be nausea-inducing in my case.
You don't go at a particular pace, Britisher. You're not being tasked with the concept of doing 10 miles.
Maybe you don't quite overfill to the level I do.
Possibly.
When we're talking full roast dinner here.
The Britisher voring down his enormous roast dinner. Yes, of course. And it's also, when you say it's a miniature Christmas, but I do find it funny that virtually there are a few differences between a Sunday roast and a Christmas dinner, apart from usually the meat changes, and because most people who have a roast dinner will have either a chicken roast or a beef roast, but it is very typical traditionally to have a beef roast, and then at Christmas time you have goose, turkey, or chicken as the
yeah.
So you switch from the dark meat to the white meat. Which is...
Yes, I wasn't so much talking about the nature of the meat, but more sort of the nature of the.
Oh, I know what you were talking about.
Okay, we've got a full pallet here, so now we'll just slaughter it all until we can't, until we're so full we can't chew anymore.
And of course, that deftly underrated aspect of the Sunday roast, which is stuffing. Stuffing is just, I mean, it to me, it makes the meal.
I have to be very careful how I word this. Or no, I will deliberately. No, I've
just
never been
be honest with me, Britisher. You've never cared for stuffing because you're a filthy colonial.
Yes, I've never been one for stuffing, and I know full well that people are going to try and take our talking about stuffing and liking a good stuffing or otherwise and try and turn it into having some other meaning. But yes, in the context of this conversation, no, I have never really been anyone for stuffing.
I love a good stuffing. I find that without a good stuffing on a Sunday afternoon, a roast isn't worth having.
So you are one of these people who has these stuffing balls, do you? So
I don't
even
have
though
it.
You're actually eating beef, which doesn't really have any stuffing like chicken or turkey might have, you nonetheless want some stuffing with it.
I want stuffing frequently. Can one of the moderators please ban this person who is mocking the death of David Amess, please? The stuffing wise, it's the only way that I can find to palate chestnuts, because I don't enjoy a roast chestnut, for instance. Although
what is wrong with you?
Although I know it's very much a Christmas tradition, we used to roast them in the fireplace in an open fire, as it should properly be done.
Well, there is roast chestnuts, or there is of course chestnut puree, which for the French is vermicelle and to the Italians is vermicelli, which are sort of like spaghettis made out of chestnut puree. and then with lots of whipped cream on top, and perhaps some grated chocolate, something like that. It is a well-known dessert over on the continent, particularly around Christmas time. And you would have none of that. You would instead instead eat bowls of stuffing, would you?
I wouldn't just eat balls of stuffing. Like it's not a sweet Lord above. Sorry, I've been knocked off my my train of thought there.
You just disappeared just briefly mid laugh, but yes, it's good to have you back.
Hagnar the Viking has renewed his membership for the channel. It says, "Pst, guess what?" And then has dropped a $300 donation with the text "Germania, the Länder est." I think that's the largest.
Actually, in order to celebrate Hagnar the Viking's donation, and please, I have advised you, Hagnar, to stay off the liquor. But in that case, of course, it is worth mentioning that when it comes to Germany, they are, of course, best known for their breads. Germans have a fantastical selection of breads. I know they also do, they're also famous for sausages and all sorts of the sauerkraut. But bread, I think that's where they kind of more than likely lead the culinary league table in Europe.
I see. Yeah. So you rather than sausages, you would say the German breads are what?
Yes, I would say that bread is more than likely where they're sort of just leagues ahead of everybody. Yes, because
but do you
just the variety of breads that they have in that country.
But do you enjoy a bit of German sausage, Britisher?
Yeah, so we're going now from stuffing to German sausage.
How does it prefer? Do you prefer German sausage or having a bit of stuffing?
I would definitely prefer German sausage.
You prefer the British
Bratwurst and Krakauer, I would say, are very good creations of theirs.
Thank you very much, Hagnar the Viking, for your very, very generous donation. I believe that is the largest donation we've ever had on the channel, but someone's welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, but yes, thank you ever so much. That is, for context, that's usually what this channel makes in 2 months in one super chat. So thank you.
I'm surprised that he goes by the tag Hagnar the Viking and not Hagnar the Elder.
Do tell.
Well, it was Hagnar. It was Hagnar. It was Cato the Elder, who is known for the line "Carthago delenda est."
Ah, I see. But he wants to distinguish himself. You see, that's what it is.
I see.
I can see.
I mean, maybe he will be talking about figs next, because again, Cato did that. He dropped a fig whilst passing the Senate floor, only to be stopped. Oh, you've dropped something. And then several senators stopping to gather around to look at this magnificent specimen of fig that he seemed to have dropped, only for him to then start berating them once again that this fig had come from Carthage. And see how fresh it is. This is how short a distance we are away from Carthage. They could be upon us at any moment. Carthago delenda est. Yes, he was a little obsessed, our dear Cato the Elder.
Just a tad. Speaking of, I can see several people in the chat. Just going back momentarily to our sort of discussion of roast dinners, etc. So I can see Louis the 17th I think it's Louis the
Are they
17th.
are they by any chance disagreeing with us
No,
about
no, they say
with you about the value of a good stuffing?
No, they said French bread is a pain. Please tell me you get that, Britisher. You're French.
I do get that, yes. Actually, baguettes are supposed to have been invented precisely because of the Germans. Because the German troops of Napoleon, they obviously insisted on having their bread because they were so used to having the good bread and whatever. So much so that I think they had their own bakers with the army. And the French troops grumbled that they didn't have the equivalent. And Napoleon is supposed to have had a problem with logistics in that regard, as in, you can't now expect me to also acquire further mule carts and whatever to now move your bread rations and whatever. So what we shall do is you will have the bread baked, but you then must carry it yourself. So like that, we don't have additional logistical pressure. And so a loaf of bread was designed that they would be able to carry up a trouser leg.
Oh, I see.
That is supposedly the origin of the shape of the baguette.
I see.
It's more than likely just a ludicrous myth, but it makes
do you know
for a
what?
nice little
I don't care. I don't care if it's a myth. I love the idea that the French were, the only other story that I would accept is that the French were so ashamed of their manhoods that they decided to create a way for them to become tripods all by themselves. That's this is ridiculous. But I love the idea of this thing. And as people were saying in the chat, the concept of eating a roast dinner is something which is spiritually fulfilling. There's something about eating your nation's cuisine that I find that really does connect you in a sense beyond yourself to the country you come from, and it's something which is really difficult to quantify. But I feel considerably different, shall we say. I enjoy fish and chips. It's offhand. I'm not trying to put in some kind of special sort of kind of meaning behind the concept that I went to the beach and I had a fish and chips. I enjoyed the fish and chips. I wasn't thinking, damn, I'm proud to be British, right? Like that was, it's not something which is going through my head. But what is going through my head is when I'm other places. When I am abroad, I remember I have a very strong memory of being in Brussels in Belgium, and ordering a fish and chips when I was a child, and this fish came with these chips which weren't chips, and the fish wasn't cod, and it still had its bones in it, and it was just I found it horrible. And it certainly wasn't British fish and chips. And there's that sense that there's no one out there that makes fish and chips like the British do. And there's nobody who demands a fish and chips like the British do. And the same can be told for several other meals. And that no matter where you go in the world, that you will be able to make a better roast than most of the people in that country who've never even attempted it, and you could also bring that. So, I've got friends from places from all over the world, and I look to it and I go, it's something that I can share with another part of the world as well, and with my family and friends back home, of course, is the concept of a good piece of British cuisine, whether that's a Sunday roast, whether that's like a full English breakfast, whether or not it's it's something as simple as a bacon sarnie done correctly, or if it's something which is very, very British, like a toad in a hole, say, or Lancashire hot pot, which is layered potatoes and cooked in a very particular way with the beef underneath and so on. So it's something which does connect you, I think, to where you come from. that kind of shared culinary history. I mean, do you feel the same way, or is it much less of a it doesn't really matter to you?
I think it's a communal thing. So basically, I think if you were to eat something that would be particularly British and you would just be on your own, I don't think it feels the same way. But if you sit down and it's the whole family and it's a Sunday roast and whatever, I think it's a sort of bonding thing on several levels. So I think, yes, there is something British about it, where you're all pretty much channeling something, not even consciously. But as I say, I think it comes about by the fact that it's a communal thing, and I think that's why when you say you're just having a quick fish and chips somewhere, that's not when it happens. But if, for example, you're a group of people and you all go for a fish and chips, and then you all, I don't know, sit on the beach or what, or walk around and it's raining and you're eating these increasingly soggy chips as you're going along. There is something about that then again channels the whole thing, but it only happens in a communal manner. So there has to be several of you, and I think that's what you feel when you sit down for the Sunday dinner.
I think that's quite apt. Yes, I love the people seem to be resonating with that. Aside from insulting the French, of course. Sunny Jim there, you can't beat.
Well, there are many things that can sort of be seen as British when it comes to food, and I think one of the things we are known for is condiments.
What, you mean like ketchup and mayonnaise? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, HB sauce, Worcester sauce, or Worcestershire, as they like to call it on the continent.
Worcester!
Worcester, or something like that, yeah. And you said, no, Worcester. Which is where what I'm certain is the whole source of P.G. Wodehouse calling his character Bertie Wooster. I'm sure that the Worcester is a joke on it's said.
On the pronunciation, yeah.
Yes. But no, I think in that regard, we have quite a tradition of sort of condiments that have been around since the 19th century that are still consumed today, like Worcestershire sauce, like what's it called? Geoffrey Watkins mushroom ketchup. Wonderful concoctions like that, or Hendo's.
Gentleman's relish.
Gentleman's relish, precisely. And you see these things, and they've all been around for God only knows how long.
Coleman's mustard.
Yes, and also in the sweet aisle. When it comes to biscuits and treats and chocolates and whatever.
Just pause you there. And to any Americans in the chat right now, whilst we do appreciate you being here, biscuits are not what you think they are.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Yes, but what is it? Fry's chocolate cream. That's the oldest chocolate bar in history. And it's still in production.
Is it older than the Americans, though? As in, literally older than the Americans?
No, it is. It is literally the first. It is no. It's not older than 1776 or whatever. But
damn.
It's.
I wish it was.
It is the first ever chocolate bar, and it's still being made today. And you see these things, and you just go, there is something wonderful about these sort of historical packagings. I mean, what's it called? Golden syrup with the lion.
Yeah, Lyle's golden syrup. Yes.
You see these brands, and they're sort of immortal in the supermarket. Yes, those things are all part of the sort of national and cultural fabric, in a very sort of subtle way. And yes, they're quite wonderful.
I tell you what, whilst Fry's chocolate cream is not older than the American state, shall we say, it is. It was created in 1866. So 90 years after the establishment of the Americans.
So when was the American Civil War? Was it 1865 or something like that, wasn't it? While they were in the American Civil War, I guess, we started making chocolate bars.
We were revolutionising the chocolate bar industry. Like the fact that those two are next to one another in the history books is clearly related. You know, who knew that development?
It's obvious that our creation surpassed their event.
It's like, Civil War? I don't care, mate. Takes another bite of Fry's chocolate cream. You know.
We just sent a few military observers to watch what was going on. Meanwhile, stuffed our faces with chocolate. Yes.
I just, yeah. So there we go. I don't think I've ever. I mean, I've had variants of Fry's chocolate cream, but I don't think I've ever had the branded Fry's chocolate cream. I'll have to pick one up and give it a go. But obviously, I know things like that. And what was the what is the product? It's designed for it's for walkers, right? Not the crisp company. It's for walkers, hikers, people who are out and about, and it's basically pure sugar, and it's like a peppermint cream or mint cream.
This doesn't ring a bell with
me. Trying to remember. Perhaps someone in the chat.
But is this some sort of famous powder that's been around?
No,
since...
it comes in like a tablet, almost a tablet, and you break off squares of it and you have it. Kendall mint cake.
Kendall mint cake. Yes.
That's
okay.
The one,
yeah.
Yes.
Now I'm with you. Yeah.
Very, very.
Yes. That has nothing to do with cake.
No.
But we just call it so to confuse tourists. Yes.
Kendall mint cake, which is I mean you can make it yourself. It's dead simple, but somebody marketed it. You know, it's great if you need it. But it basically has the consistency of almost soap. You know, that's kind of what you're talking.
Really selling it.
No.
It
looks like a bar of soap, and then you break a piece off and you take a bite, and it's this creamy, sugary, very, very sweet mess. And it was basically created because somebody was trying to create glacier mints. So I assume people are familiar with glacier mints, right? So it's the hard sweet. And it went
hard-boiled sweets.
Yes, hard-boiled sweets, and it went wrong. They left the mixture going overnight. It turned cloudy and solidified, and then the company Kendall's started selling it as a product in and of itself, and they were quite correct. So it's the oldest surviving mint cake company in the world. It has been making it since 18.
Didn't I read once that somewhere around the same part of the world, Kendall or Keswick or something like that, this just, it tweaked a memory that I think somewhere out there is still the last remaining working snuff mill.
Oh?
So if you, because, snuff, tobacco as in taken as snuff. I mean, nobody does that anymore today. So as such, everybody now consumes tobacco in cigarettes, or, if they do at all, or pipes, or cigars, or whatever. But I remember seeing something on television once, or whatever, where they referred to somewhere, I think in the Lake District, or whatever, there was the last place on Earth where there was still grinding snuff.
I think I'm just
maybe someone in the chat knows.
A cursory search says Morden Hall Park in Morden might have one. But yes, the oldest one was built in 1840. But I don't know whether or not there's still one in Britain which is still working. Although snuff is still sold, interestingly. But
well, if it's still sold, someone must still be making it.
Yes, but it's whether or not they're still making it over here, basically.
It's more than likely to all those reenactors who want to look as realistic as possible as they're walking around in their red coat uniform.
It's quite close to quite close to chewing tobacco, as I understand it. It's the concept of nasal tobacco is quite strange. But I can't find a specific thing. But in the 1700s, for anyone who doesn't know, snuff was the luxury product of the time. It was the mark of refinement to have a snuff box.
People still today collect snuff boxes, don't they? Because quite a few of them were very, very
very
high
ornate
luxury items of the aristocracy or whatever. So they were made by proper artists.
They were usually. I mean, if you think of what a woman would have, a powder puff sort of thing, it's usually about that size. They're usually these kind of little round, ornamented things, and they're either bereft of any kind of ornamentation, or it's all ornamentation. And they're very, very intricate and fascinating. And if you just search up snuff box, you can see that these things were clearly very, 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 very prized, especially amongst the aristocracy. So there you go. I might have to have a chat with John D, who took over as the co-host of Unpopular Opinions after you left Britisher, and because he's very keen on sort of old classic art and that sort of thing, and have a chat to him about it. But the snuff box, and there it is. How did we end up on this? We were talking about roast dinners. Then we talked about how you hate a good stuffing.
Then you talked about Kendal mint cake, and then I said, isn't it somewhere around that part of the world that they've still got their last snuff mill?
Yes,
and that's how we ended up on snuff boxes.
So I'm not going to go through all of the British cuisines, because whilst talking about British cuisine is good, I do want to talk about. Bless him, Sir David Amess before the end of today. But crumpets are in the
yes, I'll talk about crumpet with you. Sorry, you were meaning something else.
So you don't like a good stuffing, but you love a good crumpet. Is that it, Britisher?
Very much along those lines. Yeah.
The crumpet's a curious one. How do you take your crumpets, Britisher?
Well, toasted with butter.
Toasted with butter? Any cheese?
Cheese?
Cheese and
What's
crumpets?
What's wrong with you?
Cheese and crumpets is also a very common combination.
Cheese on crumpets? No, that's perverse. That's
usually the cheese has to be cheddar, and it has to be thin enough, right? So that when it melts into the holes of the crumpet. And so it can't overload the thing, as it were. But cheese on crumpets is very nice. But usually I tend to find that a knob of butter is all you need, because you get that glorious taste, don't you, where the inside of the crumpet is super soft, very fluffy, but the outside of the crumpet has just reached that point of crisping where it crunches, and it's just perfect. Agree?
Yes, but with butter, not with cheese.
Yes, as I said, a knob of butter.
I won't even consider cheese on crumpet. That's just ridiculous.
People will also have Marmite on crumpet, and that sort of thing. You see,
some people are weird, aren't they?
Yes, very very strange. My dad was a great lover of cheese and crumpet, and I prefer them with butter myself. But there's that. And then, of course, the last two god tier, 80+% of the world of Britain loves these foods. We have the full English breakfast, also known in some cases as the builder's breakfast. I tend to see. I love a good full English breakfast, although it is one of those things which you usually have, not that you'll have any experience of this, Britisher, when one is hungover, and
yes, I can't really comment in that area.
But
yes.
when one is hungover and all your body is really craving is 2 pints of water, and and something light to eat, because if you have too much, you'll be sick. What your body instead tells you is to find the nearest greasy spoon and get yourself the biggest full English breakfast that you can, with as much salt as is possible to have on a plate.
If I remember correctly, you are again a very weird person because you have had bad experiences in your life in that regard, and therefore you go for normal toast rather than fried bread. Am I correct?
I typically...
I do remember you once disdaining fried bread and saying that it's maybe because you've had terrible examples of it whilst in the military.
Indeed. So you must remember, I would love a piece of fried bread, usually just one or half a slice, which has been done properly, which has only been very, it hasn't been over fried and it's been done for the correct way. But when I was in the military, for especially during training, for 6 months, all I had was horrible, soggy or super dry, crusty fried bread that was never cooked right, absolutely never cooked right, far too greasy and made you feel ill. And then you've got to go and do exercise. So it's not an ideal starter, but you're made to eat it. So yes, it kind of unfortunately ruined my taste for fried bread. So I will go for typically brown toast instead and see how that goes. But I've got nothing against people who enjoy a bit of fried bread with theirs. In fact, if you were to talk about the perfect composition of flavours on the plate of a full English breakfast, because it does vary, what do you have on your plate of full English?
Oh, bacon.
Yeah.
Fried egg.
Yes.
Fried mushrooms. I can have a tomato, but I'm not overly
I'm not enamoured.
I'm not ideological about it. A banger or two. No black pudding, thank you very much.
And the aforementioned fried bread, presumably.
And I like a mixture of both. I like a selection of basically having some toast and some fried bread. I can have a bite of this, and then I can have a bite of that, depending on what food I am taking in at the same time, and how I might like some more sort of fried content with it, or I just need something dry and crisp instead.
I'm just imagining, Richard, with all of your comments from today, like you're a man who's got a full English breakfast in front of him with 2 types of bread, a plate by the side with your favourite German bread, whilst you've shoved a baguette down your trousers. Right.
With a baguette down my trousers.
With a baguette down your trousers. And this bastardization of any kind of British cuisine. That would be the next thing that you get Core Dev to draw up for you.
Whilst I look across the table to see you enjoying a good stuffing. Yes.
I do enjoy a good stuffing. For me, it's got to be, right, bacon, egg, sausage. I forego the mushrooms because I dislike any vegetable that requires gills to breathe. But bacon, egg, sausage. I will have a tomato if it's so. Beans. I will have
beans. Yes, I forgot the beans. Yes, I'll have beans.
I'll have the toast or a slice of fried bread in there if I fancy it and I can tell that it's going to be cooked correctly. I will have a slice of black pudding. Thank you very much, because it is delicious.
Well, it's not as if I care about the opinion of someone who doesn't eat the mushrooms.
Fair. You can have my mushrooms. I will have your.
It's a deal. Yes, you can have my slice of black pudding, and I'll have your mushrooms.
And finally, of course, is a decent helping of hash browns, which I very much appreciate with that. Yes.
I don't really think they're a part of a
I think it's a more modern edition, but hash browns definitely have a place.
It's a sort of bastardized Swiss invasion via America.
A Swiss invasion via America is something I want to hear more about in my day-to-day life, if I'm honest. But yeah, no, I think that hash browns have a well-deserved place.
I'm sorry. There I disagree with you profoundly. I think hash browns don't belong.
And just like that,
they are of the country that thinks biscuit is of something savoury.
No.
It's that part of the world where they would be eating hash browns, isn't it? Where they think that biscuits and gravy or something, which they clearly shouldn't be, because biscuits are not what they think they are.
I don't know why do Americans call them biscuits? I don't understand how they've managed to get to this point where they have this shared history with us in some way, shape or form, and yet they've completely messed that up. Oh, biscuits and gravy. What on earth are you talking about? Don't go putting a custard cream under a beef gravy. Ridiculous. And I'm well aware that they're more like scones. But, yeah. So Scowen has sent in 50 Danish kroner. Thank you ever so much to Scowen. Says, enjoyed a nap. I did that for as long as you were late. If I did that for as long as you were late, I wouldn't be here for months. You were 61 seconds late. Thanks, Scowen. Always appreciate you chiming in as our.
Well, I don't know why we make the efforts for the like of him. I mean, given that we hear that his countrymen don't like our cuisine anyway,
and yet he keeps coming back. There you go. You should catch up, Scowen. We did talk about your countrymen for a short while, just there. Where was I? Yes, so that's the full English breakfast. We've agreed to disagree on that one. And then, of course, finally we have the bacon sarnie. But, I mean, like, the bacon sarnie is a bacon sarnie, right? I'm not going to go too much into that. It's obvious while it's there. But then we have bangers and mash, which is rather marvellous. It's another one of those kind of surprisingly filling cuisines, I find, bangers and mash, Do you
I'm not one for mash. I quite like mash on cottage pie or something like that, but I'm not one for bangers and mash.
I'll tell you that mash is one of those curiosities where it sounds simple on paper, but can be eaten in a variety of ways and has a variety of different consistencies. So I'm not surprised that you might not like it. So, for instance, I don't think I've ever had a shop bought sort of creamy mash or whatever, and certainly nothing ever out of a packet mix. It's something that you make in at home by yourself with potatoes, usually with the skins still on, usually new potatoes, and or King Edward, and you mash them with a proper potato masher with a good bit of butter in it, and just ever so slightly a splash of milk, but not too much. Literally just a splash. I mean,
I disagree with you there with the cooking the potatoes in their skins and them being new potatoes.
See, you can take the skins off. You can peel the potatoes. You can mash, proper, regular potatoes as well. That the with the skins on is something which I prefer, which is fine, right? But I'm aware that this is
with Maris Pipers. And it needs to be a proper potato ricer, because otherwise, if you end up with any sort of lumpiness or whatever, okay. I'm sorry.
Really? Yeah. Okay, because I quite like a little bit of consistency to my mash. You see, I don't like the idea that it's like completely
Well, but I think
smooth.
we've established that you're weird.
All right, but like I don't want it to be there's a happy medium for me between completely lumpy, because I know some people like to have bits of cheese in it and blocks of other things, or cubes. This is the other thing. So they'll do the mashup, right? And then they'll also cook separately a couple of other potatoes, and they'll dice them into cubes, and then
what is wrong with people?
And they'll intersperse the cubes of potato in the mash, and that doesn't particularly hold any real appeal to me. I think it should still be mash. And then yes, but of course the joy of mash as well is with bangers and mash is, of course, you put the sausages in. You have 3 or 4 sausages, and then you have the gravy. And the gravy is what makes the meal, because it's thick and it's rich and it's delicious, and you have
the sound to your voice there.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't just and then you have the gravy. No, you suddenly went all Clarkson, and then you have the gravy.
And then you have the gravy. Yes. I am a big fan of the gravy, which makes it much in the same way as you have a toad in the hole, right? Where if you just had batter and sausages, it would be but you have the gravy, and it makes the meal. So there's that. You mentioned cottage pie earlier, right, Bridger? Cottage pie or shepherd's pie? Which do you prefer?
Cottage pie.
Definitely a cottage pie, man. So you prefer the beef to the lamb?
Yes,
essentially.
Yes.
So those people again who don't know, a cottage pie and a shepherd's pie, the only difference between the two of them is the meat involved. Cottage pie is made with beef with a layer of potato mash on top, which is then crisped off in the oven, and you can have other things in there with it. It's usually it's the beef with the beef stock with usually some vegetables, usually carrots or peas or both, and layered on top, and it can be very lovely as well. And then shepherd's pie is the same, but with lamb. And I think most of the time, the thing is, my parents, it's not that they were ignorant. It's just they just grew up, and it didn't matter if it was cottage pie or shepherd's pie. They were both just called shepherd's pie to me. So I can't even tell you whether or not I prefer cottage pie or shepherd's pie, because it's just, I think probably it was cottage pie that I grew up with. That was the one I preferred. Although if I have a cottage pie, I would much rather with extra helpings of carrot or parsnip rather than peas in it. I don't know where you stand on peas, Bridger.
Well, I would have peas in it. I would have peas in it, carrot, mushrooms.
Mushrooms?
But then, yes, of course.
Very well, Britisher, you hippie, with your addiction to mushrooms. Do go on.
No, as far as I'm concerned, yes, of course there would be mushrooms in it. Because it's really sort of a stewy thing you really make with the mince. And then when you've got the right consistency, then you just basically bang it in a sort of flat-based pan and lavish lots of mashed potatoes on it.
Yes, lots of mash.
And then comes the fork work for anybody who's ever made cottage pie or shepherd's pie. Then comes the fork work of leveling out the mashed potato that you've scooped on top of it.
Yes, with a fork. And then, if you're feeling extra special, you kind of slightly crimp the edges.
And you create a sort of checkered pattern with the fork. And of course there are always the sort of disaster areas where you haven't got quite enough potato. So you're trying desperately to scrape some potato across what is otherwise a sort of still a lake of minced stew under it. Anybody who's ever made it will know of what I speak. But no, it's a fun dish to make, and it's very sort of homely food to consume.
I tell you,
and once again, it's one where if there are several of you, this is the kind of comfort food that you can have kind of curled up on a sofa together.
Agreed, and I do just want to highlight to everyone here, like, despite our differences in taste, Britisher, I think we've really kind of struck, because this is certainly not the topic that I had intended to talk about on this episode of Fake Accents, and it's not going to be everything that we talk about tonight, but it's one of those things where it's homely, and it's also, none of it is individual, right? So whereas you would have with the Italian food, for instance, whilst it is tasty, a lot of it can be individualized, right? So you can cook just enough pasta for yourself, and you can cook pizza, which is individual, whatever it is, 11-inch or whatever, but or 9-inch. But the British cuisine, a lot of it is designed to be made in larger portions for family and friends as well. And it's the sort of thing which makes me want to, if I'm going to make these dishes, if I'm going to make this British cuisine, I want to cook it for other people. I want to share it with other people. It's something which I know that everyone will enjoy as much as anything else as well, right? I don't think there's anything which is so egregious in a lot of what we've talked about in British cuisine that people would just turn their noses up at it, out of hand as well. You can always, it is that kind of comfort food that everyone's going to get along with, as it were.
I mean, it's quite telling that in that series, All Creatures Great and Small, that's doing very well at the moment. The story of James Herriot. Which is very sort of oldie worldy and embraces very much this kind of homely feel. Once in a while in that series, they will all end up around the table eating a Sunday roast or something like that. And yes, you even see it represented in a sort of what could be seen as a kind of almost showcase of old-fashioned Britishness, which that series no doubt is. Mm-hmm. You see that celebrated within something like that in various scenes. So yes, I think it has something of as you say, a homeliness about it, British cuisine, which perhaps doesn't translate so well to the bistro, if you know what I mean. It can't that easily be recreated because it's as much about an atmosphere as it is about the food itself. And that's why, of course, when people come over here and then get to experience pub foods, and they're in a pub and it's bustling and there's an atmosphere, then they kind of get it. Because it's once again, it's a sort of together thing. It's not supposed to be a food that you somehow, as you say, consume in individual portions individually. So yes, that it's the togetherness factor is as much part of the food itself.
Much like a trifle. No.
Oh yes, trifle.
Right.
Yes.
So you have the individual equivalent of the trifle, I would say, which are fools, right? So you can have strawberry fool, gooseberry fool, that sort of thing, right? That's the sort of thing you'd have in a lunchbox or something quick and easy. A trifle is a whole family affair.
Yes, it's a big bowl.
A big bowl of cream and custard and jelly and cake. It's all together.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's not jelly.
No jelly in your
No, it's sponge. You've got sponge at the bottom.
Yes, of course, yes.
And then you make perhaps you already need to incorporate some sherry into the sponge, depending on what you use. If you've got soft sponge, you're okay. But if you use those sort of sponge those hard sponge fingers, you need some liquid with which to mash it up.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the sponge fingers.
So it depends what you're using. But then you make some fruit salad with some sherry in it, and you let that sort of stew a bit in order to soften, and then that's the layer, not jelly. As far as I'm concerned, jelly, that's the shop bought stuff.
Fair
But
enough.
the
Fair enough.
self-made stuff, that's fruit salad on top of the
Very, very,
sponge,
very.
and then custard, and then whipped cream, and then flaked almonds.
Oh, really? I would agree with you up until the flaked almonds, which is not something I've come across before. But yes, I think you're very.
Well, but as I say, you're weird. We've agreed on this.
Stop it.
Black pudding and all that.
Very, very. I think you're quite correct on the trifle question. Even if you don't enjoy a good stuffing, even if you'd prefer a good crumpet, good bit of crumpet.
Yes, a more one for crumpet. Yes.
Yes. Okay. And your love of German sausage, of course,
Of course,
and
yes,
bread.
yes. No, let's not forget my love of German sausage. Yes. Have you ever partaken of German sausage?
Yes, I've been to Germany. Yes,
And have you had bratwurst and Krakauer and the likes?
yes, I have indeed.
And you never thought actually this is quite good.
It is very good, yes. But I just want.
So yeah, they're good. They're good at sausages, but they're not really alone at making sausages. But when it comes to their range of breads, all the way to pumpernickel, you just go, yeah, they do seem to have cornered the bread market here a bit.
I do like a bit of sauerkraut. Not going to lie.
Sauerkraut, yes, is good. If it's it's usually had with pork. And therefore, the acid of the sauerkraut is a good counterweight to the fattiness of the pork.
Indeed.
Actually, it's full of vitamin C, and when the British, who were of course the limeys, set sail, and they basically cornered the market for all the limes, other European nations needed to have their own source of vitamin C, and I believe the Dutch and the Germans used sauerkraut in barrels in the bottom of the ship. Yes.
There you go. Now I'm afraid it's time for our British cuisine stream to come to an end. Not Fake Accents Unite, mind, but it is time for the food portion, as we must talk about the topic of today's stream, which or the title I should say, which is R.I.P. To Sir David Amess, who was the MP who was so brutally murdered just the other day. And there's been a lot of controversy over this particular story in the media in particular. They don't know what to do with themselves. I tell you what, Britisher, just because I know where I stand on this particular issue. I know what I'm thinking about it. Why don't you conceptualize to me sort of your position, where you currently stand on the Amess?
My position is one somewhat of irritation of watching the media jump through hoops at the moment, particularly Marc Francois doing the rounds.
Indeed.
And various other politicians, because I understood that one was taking this line before one knew any more. So, it is true that political discourse has become more and more polarized and more coarse, and more and more aggressive, particularly online. That is true. That there's no way of getting away from that. But they're kind of running away with it now, as though it were some kind of little bandwagon that they can all jump on. And Marc Francois is even suggesting it to be David's law.
Yeah, so for those people who don't know, okay, so I'm just going to give some context. David Amess was the MP for Southend? Southend, yes.
Yeah. It's got two MPs. He was one of them. Yes.
He was one of them. Southend South, I think he was. And basically, a few things have happened. So he was stabbed to death by a man of Somalian descent, who was raised in this country, who seems to have been radicalized by preachers that he was watching on YouTube and other sites, in particular some of the speeches by Andrew Chowdhury, and he stabbed Sir Amess 17 times, where he then bled out. Now, there's been several fallouts from this. One has been the church response. Okay, so the church is angry, the Catholics in particular, because the priest was not allowed to give him last rites because it was an active crime scene. Now, as much as I am sympathetic towards Christian last rites and everything else, I think that was the correct decision. I think that even though they caught him right there and there, you need to preserve the forensic evidence. You can't you can't have dirtied the crime scene.
In all fairness, if I just may interject there, because I think when it comes to the last rites, he would have then still been alive.
If he was still alive, then...
from what I understood, they pretty much fought to the end trying to keep him alive.
Yes, of course.
So I don't think it was a matter of the doctors just going, okay, there's nothing more we can do, and then the police saying to the priests, no, you can't come here, because he's about to die, and then it's a crime scene. So I think it's more a fact that, yes, other services took priority over the church and just basically went, I'm sorry, but there's nothing, you'll just have to stay out of the way. And by the time he was dead, well, then there was nothing. There was nothing for the priest to do, and the police just basically took over and said, "It's a crime scene now."
So I'm sympathetic towards both sides, essentially, in this matter. But that's been the church's response. They've been quite concerned, but that's also thrown up lots of questions about, is this a Christian country, etc. I know that the ever controversial the ever controversial Peter Hitchens has come out very much on the side of last rites having, should have been given, etc. But apparently I'm stunningly wrong on this, according to Jean de Valette in chat. Please feel free to
well, from what I understood, they were actually operating in situ. So basically, they were, they arrived and they had a helicopter there and everything, but they just felt, no, I'm sorry, we can't move the guy. He's
losing too much blood, presumably.
He's losing too much. He's just dying on us. So they tried to operate in situ, as in, let's see what we can mend to actually make him movable. And therefore, I think every effort was given to save him. And by the time that was over, he was dead, or he was unconscious but still alive. I don't know. But I really don't think that one will have just said, no, priests don't matter, go away. I think it's more a matter of the emergency services being there, saying we have to try and keep the guy alive. And
yes,
we can't all just step aside because we've now decided, oh no, it's too late, so now you can do your last rites thing. So yeah. I think it was more a matter of practicality being in the way of it, rather than some ideology saying the priest doesn't matter.
Right, yes.
I mean, particularly given that we know that David Amess was a very religious man.
Yes.
So he would have preferred it. But chances are he, wherever his spirit is now, he won't have minded that one tried what one could to the last to save him.
I'm sure God would understand, essentially. When it comes to, it's a question between giving him last rites or whether or not he could potentially still be with us today. I think people would prefer him still to be with us today. So I think the decision was made correctly there. The second response has been from people making comparisons to Joe Cox and talking about death threats to MPs in general, and the kind of it's interesting to note the kind of plethora of responses from the opposition in particular. So you've got some of the opposition who clearly were on very good terms with David and giving their best, and then you've got people like Sadiq Khan, for instance, who said, very saddened to hear that David Amess, MP, has passed away, rather than saying what we all know to be true.
Murdered by a Muslim nutjob.
That he was murdered by a Muslim nutjob, yes. Not that I would even expect him to say that, but even give it the courtesy of calling it a murder, is something else entirely. It's clearly not manslaughter. The man travelled for over 2 hours to get to that particular surgery. Even if the MP was chosen at random, the premeditation of murdering an MP was not. He also seemed to want to murder a Christian because he wanted to take revenge on what he saw as a representative of the British Parliament and Christendom as invading Iraq. And as we know, he was a follower of the religion of peace. So there's that. But of course, then you've got the other side, which is that the Conservatives have an option, right? They have an option for what they can do about this. One of the things that they can do is weaponize, essentially, David Amess's death in the same way that that Labour weaponized the death of Joe Cox. Right?
Or particularly the Brexit Remainers weaponized.
And the Brexit Remainers, yes. And to use it as a weapon to smite the enemy, their enemy, I should say, and to use this to usher in what might be considered more conservative sort of controls, especially on immigration and border control, etc. But no, what this has turned into has been a resurgence of the online harms bill. And online hate crime, which has been to talk about the fact that should we allow people to be anonymous online at all?
Yes, and you just sort of think, what relevance has this got to this actual murder?
Yeah, and how,
which is none.
And not to mention, I think already, your MPs are far too atomized from the public as it is. They spend all of their time on Twitter or in committees, or meeting with donors, etc. They do their job, but they don't spend an awful lot of time on community surgeries. A lot of them have this huge disdain for the public, and they outsource, a lot of the responses to staff. Not to mention the fact that the public have largely lost. I wouldn't say it's not even necessarily that they've lost faith in their MPs, but you can tweet at your MP now, and that's a lot less effort than writing them a letter, and it has a lot less impact as a result. So the number of people who actually contact the MPs has also gone down. So you get this increasing divide between the MPs and regular people, and now you've got this sort of this idea that they want to change the online harms bill to call it.
Want to change that?
They want to change the name.
They want to bring that bill back.
Yes.
They also want to we need lots of security for MPs.
Yeah, lots of.
So let's turn visiting your MP at the MP surgery at kind of like going into an old-fashioned bank where the teller was behind bulletproof glass. If you know what I mean. And you think, well, none of that is really necessary except for one minority. Because, the death of Joe Cox aside, all the other attacks were really by a particular group. I mean, why have they got all those barriers around Parliament? Is it really to protect them from the far right?
No. Well...
that guard who lost his life when the guy who had rammed a van across Westminster Bridge then came charging in with knives. Again, I mean, this was not a member of the far right. It was not a member. what I said on the week that was. It was not a Jew. It was not it was not a Hindu, and it was not a Sikh.
No, and if you take
it's the same minority over and over and over again.
If you take the statistics for terror suspects in the UK and terror offences in the UK, it is 71% come from Islam, and it's one of those things where you go
a population of a proportion of the population that is which? I mean,
it's
what
2%.
Is their actual...
It's about 2 to 2.5%. Yes.
Yeah, that's so 71% out of 2.5%. I mean, yeah,
that's what we call overrepresentation, folks. But it's one of those things where, believe it or not, I mean, as extreme in general as the Islamic population is, and it is, the concept of the moderate Muslim is one which is quite. Cloudy.
In all fairness, I have met moderate Muslims.
Yes, of course. So have I, and I know a lot of them, or I know a good number. I mean, I live in London, but the trouble is because those moderate Muslims hate the extremists, and this is something which people don't seem to get, especially in the people who want to prevent Islamophobia. Well, one of the ways that you could prevent Islamophobia is if you actually dealt with the crime in those bloody communities, right? So. Because if you take a look at something like
chief cause of Islamophobia is the terrorism.
Yes, if you take a look at let's take another example of another crime, which is primarily
if you go back to the 90s, before all this 9/11 and whatever kicked off, the people who were complaining about Muslims or whatever were largely just out and out racists. But no,
I disagree. I disagree.
Changed.
I disagree because the people who were complaining about Muslims, typically, if you take something like the grooming gang cases, right? The people who were largely affected because of the hatred, the trouble that they saw in their communities, but also the kind of wariness from people outside those communities. Were the people from those communities. So especially people like the Indian population, parts of the Pakistani population, and so on, were the ones reporting this to the police because they don't want the murderers and the terrorists and the radicals in their community at that point. We are talking about 40, 50 years ago. All right, those are the people who came to this country and embraced tradition much more, embraced the British tradition, I should say, much more. Now, arguments can be made about to what degree people wanted them to embrace it, and to what degree they, we're not going in. All of these people were enriching the country, but a lot of them didn't want. Al Qaeda and what became ISIS to be sitting on their doorstep because it's radicalizing their daughters and their brothers and their sisters and their sons, right? It's radicalizing the thing, and of course because it's been allowed to go unchecked. If you allow the deplorable element to continue to grow, then it's going to. It's going to multiply because it's going to attract more and more people to that. It's going to radicalize more and more people to that. It is a festering sore that then takes over because the people who originally would have complained about that, they move away or they get out of there. I mean, we hear about, say white flight from the cities, for instance, when cultural clash and the multicultural experiment leads to higher crime rates in certain areas. But you also have this concept that it happens with all the other cultures as well, where you end up with moderate areas and extreme areas, and even in sort of on a microcosmic scale. I saw this in the town where I grew up, where it's very ethnically homogenous, but you had what amounted to. It's the difference between council estates and the rest of it. There's a council estate you don't go on to because that's where all the people who are doing all the drugs or dealing all the drugs, have ended up, and the police are afraid to go in there, and therefore it's not really policed, and therefore it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so if you ignore the problem and you only treat the secondary causes, or in fact no causes at all, whilst you're pretending to be treating the cause, then you run into trouble. So I find it deeply, deeply troubling, of course. That, if they're going to bring a hammer down on anyone, they're flailing it about in a room blindly after they've asked the people who are actually responsible to kindly step out of the room because they don't want to hurt them. Very, very concerning from my point of view. And of course they'd as they say, this turn it into David's law. Let's make it so that people can't be anonymous online. Well, let's just talk about how hypocritical that is anyway. Marc Francois.
It's just the ultimate insult to David Amess. I mean, let's institute a law in his name that has nothing to do with either him or his death.
Yeah, apparently, Marc Francois has gone viral today for saying that Sir David Amess was horrified by toxic online misogyny. Of the hate, Francois says enough is enough. The online harms bill should be toughened up as David's law and ban anonymous accounts and vicious hate. Blah, blah, blah. This is Tory MP Marc Francois, who was filmed telling an anti-Brexit protester that he was signing their death warrant. Okay, you've got Tory MPs who joked about planting bombs in other MPs' offices. You've got a Labour MPs who turns and calls Jeremy Corbyn an effing anti-Semite and a racist. You've got Labour MP Chris Bryant who said he would punch Ed Miliband. You've got other Tories who said that they would boast about knifing or hanging Theresa May. And all these things, are they somehow immune to their own legislation, or do they consider themselves to be above it all and that sort of thing? But it seems mad. I mean, if they're proposing that being non-anonymous, as it were, being a public figure somehow decreases the likelihood that you will say something which you might be considered offensive or hateful to another person, they are living proof that doesn't work, because they say hateful and horrible things all the time.
And somehow they don't end up stabbing each other.
Speaking of, because talking about people who complain about extremism, there are Iranians currently holding a memorial for Sir David Amess outside Parliament because he championed freeing Iran from the Ayatollah. So there are people out there who do favour an Iran free from Islam, and presumably they want to keep
they favour an Iran free of Islam per se, but I think they favour an Iran free of Islamic rule.
Sure. So I find it deeply, deeply troubling where this is going, especially given the fact that this is now moving at quite a pace, right? This isn't this isn't Marc Francois, on his personal blog advocating for this, and then everybody forgets about it in a week. This is everywhere.
Not so obvious. Welcome to the moral panic. This is the classic. This is the classic way it's been. This is the way it's been for decades, particularly in this country. So, somebody starts complaining about violent videos. The Daily Mail starts running with it, and what do we get? What were they called? The Video Nasties Act. It makes no sense. Once the panic has died down, looking back at it, none of it makes sense. Now, already at the time, there were people to whom it didn't make sense, but they didn't get heard. Nobody listened. Everybody wanted to be seen as the virtuous do-gooder, and along came these just, preposterous bans. And we've had this in British politics again and again and again, and politicians, particularly politicians who've been around the block, like Marc Francois, they full well know this. They know of the power of once one of these bandwagons gets rolling. And one of the most powerful things you can do in one of these moral panics is attach the name of the victim to the law. And hence we get all sorts of, Sarah's law, Melanie's law, God only knows what. In this particular case, they're trying to attach the name of a politician who's been murdered to a law that doesn't even have anything to do with the murder. I mean, it's now getting that silly. But yes, this is a typical moral panic. Emotions take over. It generates entirely a sort of momentum of its own. The media jump on, everybody sort of whips themselves up into a frenzy, and before you know it, this thing has passed the finishing line and becomes law, and everybody else stands there and goes, what just happened? And then 10, 20 years later, everybody looks back at it and goes, what was that about? I mean, were they all insane? But yes, this is the way in which it happens, and it's a sort of cynical marriage of Westminster Yahoo politics with tabloid journalism, and yeah, there's very little that can stop these things once these frenzies take over. But what I find really irritating in this whole thing is how this conveniently deflects from the real problem. Because, as I say, this was yet another Muslim nut job stabbing someone to death, and this was 24 hours after a Muslim convert nut job in Norway was killing people with bow and arrow. Which, again, came on the anniversary of, what was he called? Samuel Paty, the French teacher who was beheaded in France.
Yes.
And you look at these things and you just go, this can't go on. And the thing that really kind of knocks me here is this managerial attitude towards the problem. We've got the security apparatus, we will increase surveillance, we will perhaps make it harder to see MPs, we will increase their security, yada yada. And you just go, yes, but what are you doing about the underlying problem? What the football hooligans in the 1980s should have done is declare themselves a religion, and then Thatcher would never have been able to act against them.
Well, it's like... But it's also to do with this chronic failure as well in our policing system at the moment, which is, I mean, the policing system as a whole has many, many, many problems. But one of the greatest is the lack of boots on the ground of people in the street, and local people at that, policing local communities. So this idea that he should have been. Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up. I grew up in a medium-sized market town, and I remember when something happened in the town hall, or the MP held a surgery or something like that. It was a big deal, and there was the local Bobby who was there. That was his priority. He would come down and he'd make sure everyone was all right, and he'd say hello. And there just wouldn't be this kind of complete lack of presence of any kind of authority. And I appreciate that there are issues with the police, but most of the people who are boots on the ground, rather than the managerial class who live in the offices, do the job because they want to keep people safe, because they look after it. My sister is a PCSO, for instance, and very much does that job out of a sense of duty to her community, and it's one of those things where I look at it and I go, why wasn't there someone there who would have seen someone who was particularly dodgy? He waited. He stabbed Sir David Amess, and then he waited for the police to arrive to arrest him.
He made no attempt to get away or whatever.
No attempt.
But you think my work here is done.
But
yes.
But the police, you know, like there should have been someone at least in the area who was close enough, you know, someone who was there just because they were part of the local community and they're looking after the area and they are able to be there at the surgery and make sure everything's all right. You know, a local Bobby, a local PC, etc. It drives me mad that that wasn't there. The fact that he even had to wait for someone to turn up seems to me to be a dereliction of duty. When in
all fairness, I mean, I've seen my MP, and you know, it was never an affair where you would have expected a policeman to be around. You know, this is just it. They're looking for ever and ever softer targets, and they're looking for ways around these things. And the problem is, once they find a way that works, I mean, i.e. ramming people with vans, then we get a series of it. And given that the weapon of a bow and arrow is freely available, I worry as to what might come next. And that's why I think the MPs are kind of worried. You know, about their security, because yes, one of them has now proven that this can be done, and as we have seen before, that tends then to lead to repeat occurrences. But what is so staggering is they are then talking about, oh well, you know, the dangers we face from online, and you go, I'm sorry, but
what the fuck are you talking about? Yes,
none of you have yet actually been attacked from people who have launched hate campaigns against you online.
No.
So this really is, you know, completely beside the point, and I believe it's deliberately beside the point.
As if like no one has gone and said, it's not like he tweeted at him, "I'm going to kill you today at your surgery," and then did it.
Yes, an anonymous tweets of "I will murder you," and then eventually he turned up and murdered him. None of that happened.
Absurd. It is absurd. And it makes it because as a citizen of this country, I don't know what to do about it. You know,
well, you know, I mentioned before the football hooligans.
Yeah.
And in a way, when you think, UEFA did Britain a huge favour, because UEFA just basically said, fine, British clubs are banned. You can't come play here anymore. You're too troublesome. You're murdering people in the stands. We can't have it. And that enabled Thatcher to then go, right, we're going to change this. And there were lots of complaints. This was too harsh. This was this was that. But she basically now had the way of saying, well, it's not coming from us. It's coming from Europe. If you ever want to see Manchester United play Bayern Munich or Real Madrid again, we have to do something. We have to get rid of these thugs. And so effectively, some pressure was brought to bear on the minority, which in this case was the British, who had within them a minority, which was the football hooligans, that needed addressing. But effectively, an authority needed to do something. And in this case, it was UEFA. It was the European Football Authority that just basically said, look, if your football hooligans are beating people to death in the football stands and all sorts of stuff is constantly kicking off whenever an English football club comes to town, then we're not having it anymore. You can't play in European competitions. End of. We don't care how much money it costs you. And to my mind, it's sort of almost the bigger picture of what I think in a way has to happen. That one has to start clamping down on the minority that is the Muslims, for them to then start doing something about their own minority within their ranks.
Yeah, and you can't listen
and
to their complaints.
It's almost as if it is only the entire minority being penalised, which will give the majority within their ranks the power to actually do something against their own minority.
I can see Hagnar in the chat saying, you do know you just don't like it. Grab the local men of the town, start running them off. Okay, look, I know what needs to be done. relatively speaking, about the Islamic problem, and we've talked about that many, many times, right? The issue is the MPs at the moment who are exploiting this for a particular purpose that is, aside from being incredibly damaging to online discourse as a whole, and to people who want to speak out because anonymously because they can't risk speaking out personally, aside from just a decent right to privacy, right? And the state of our government at the moment, who lack the backbone to address the problem directly. Tommy Robinson, for all his faults, tried to do the gather up the men of the town and run them out, sort of approach, and that, to be honest, that hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't worked. He had some mildly successful campaigns with some protests, which led to some reports being written, but his overall approach just hasn't worked, and has led to more trouble because they scapegoat you. That's the trouble. They scapegoat you as the mad ones, rather than the others, and the population is kept confused enough, especially if they don't live anywhere near these areas, or ever coming into contact with these people, or they just have positive interactions with them. That does happen, and you are quite, they'll scapegoat you into oblivion. They'll send you to prison. And they'll ruin it. So there we go. And that sort of thing. I'm talking about protests in that being very polite about it, Hagnar, very polite. But you have people who tried to get their children back who were arrested doing it. So there you go. Anyway, a mob will only make this worse, as WTF, I am actually right says, and I agree with that.
When it comes to the entire practicality of not allowing anonymity, you would have to imagine that anonymity would only be banned in Britain.
Yes.
This would mean that, for example, let's take Twitter as an example. For the rest of the world, you could still be perfectly anonymous.
VPN sales would go through the roof.
Yes, but just think of it. Forget VPNs for a moment. This means that, of course, Americans would quite happily still be anonymous on Twitter. But we wouldn't be able to follow those accounts, because they would have to be filtered out because they're anonymous. So
I don't know about that, because they're only really concerned with British accounts harassing them, right?
I think it would be the principle of being an anonymous account per se. So you would have that situation where, God knows how many other accounts that you might like following or whatever. You couldn't do, and it's not just Twitter. As I say, it's YouTube, it's anything. If it would be anonymous, well, then it couldn't go ahead, because anonymity would then just be it would just be a front for abuse.
Well, it would be possible that you could. What I think they would do is allow you to maintain having whatever username that you like, but they would tie you. You would have to register with a passport, right? So, or other form of identification, so that you are quantifiably, physically tied to that account using a piece of official legislation. And then whatever you say on it will then be dragged against, because it becomes a matter of public record, right?
Well, I mean, we'll see which way they go. But yes, I really think that you'll have a serious issue. I mean, this was one of the problems that they had with the entire idea of wanting basically to regulate all porn. And They suddenly realised, well, hang on a moment, everything is abroad, really, and those operators in other countries, they won't be interested in cooperating with the British government. So we'll then have to start we'll start having to ban everything. So unless it is specifically permitted, it needs to be banned.
So it's two points, I think, to be made. So one is Twitter could turn around and say, we could do without 70 million users. We're just not that bothered. But it will come down to, because they've got 1 billion or whatever it is. But it would come down to, one, how much money they're making from the UK in terms of the advertising and ad spend is the lifeblood of Twitter, right? So people promoting products and tweets and viewpoints, etc., sponsored posts and sponsored products. And then there's the other side, which is controlling the discourse. So whether or not
I don't think Twitter would want to give up on the British market.
I don't think so.
But I think they would simply have to come up with a sort of Twitter Lite for the British market. And in order to basically cater for it, anybody who would be seen from Britain, that is, I know VPNs, but forgetting VPNs, anybody who could be seen as, automatically, if you switch on your computer and you just go onto Twitter, you would only be able to see people who are not anonymous. And that would mean that any anonymous account would, as such, otherwise have to be filtered out.
Make Twitter incredibly boring. I think it would be the quickest way to kill Twitter.
So it would, they would not want to give up on Twitter because there would still be people on Twitter that they wouldn't want to forfeit, because the rest of the world would still be able to see all of them. So, even the Queen has a Twitter account these days, doesn't she? And Number 10 Downing Street and Stephen Fry and lots of stars and whatever. So they wouldn't want the rest of the world not to be able to see these things and whatever. So they would still maintain a British Twitter, but they would then just basically say, okay, so anybody who isn't certifiably not anonymous, really. So for example, all the what do they call them? The blue check marks.
Yes.
They would be. You would be able to get them. But yes, everyone else, highly questionable how they would then differentiate what's an anonymous account, because an anonymous account can be anything. What's she called? Titania McGrath is an anonymous account.
Yes.
But that's a satire. So how do you
I still reckon that you will be allowed to have an account which is a persona, but that persona will have to be tied to a physical identification. So Titania McGrath is run by, I can't remember the comedian's name, but he's a right-wing comedian, and he would simply have to attach his passport, essentially, to that account. And then if that account ever tweeted anything which was considered bannable or illegal under this particular piece of proposed legislation, then he would be liable for it, and there would be a paper trail leading back to him. So
just consider how much fun that takes out of all of it.
Yes.
Once upon a time you could just open an account. Now you'll have to submit your passport details.
Yes, I think it would be a very...
That is if that is how it is going to end up working. And at the same time, then you've also got the entire, honeypot scenario. If you want to get on at everybody's passport details.
Yes, that's
what was also suggested about, an age verification system online.
In terms of data protection, it's an absolute nightmare. An absolute nightmare, and a hacker's field day.
But then what do these people care about practicality, right?
Oh, yes.
Mark Francois is becoming very famous right now.
Oh, yeah, and Andrew Doyle. Thanks for that, chat.
And he's managing to shake off the Mr. Greg's image.
I don't know. But
now he's a holier than thou.
I I'm going to have to give this some thought because I'm going on Unpopular Opinions tomorrow to talk about it. But it's...
by the way, I put up some time ago, I put up a picture of David Amess that Shia Tory tweeted. I put it up in the stream chat.
Oh, yes, because he when he got his knighthood, he dressed up as a knight of old in a full suit of armour.
And as I say, he made quite a fun effort.
Yes, it was. I thought it was particularly cheerful and very, very much in keeping with the spirit of it, and I thought it was great. So, yes, thank you to that. Sorry, I'm just I'm getting spammed with a lot of people, but that's Basket Weavers. Speaking of Basket Weavers, we had a very successful. So those of you who know Basket Weavers, which is in the link to which is in the pinned message in the chat. Basket Weavers is a sort of a localism focused meetup group. My stream on my video on of my speech talking about it is building community in the modern world, and it's all about building these local communities. So, for instance, in London, there's about 20 of us now who get together once or twice a month, and we go do fun activities. So we went mini golfing last weekend. We went to Lotus Eaters Live, the Sargon event. That was quite good. We did a pub meetup before that. We've done various bits and pieces. We're looking at going clay pigeon shooting and other such activities, a walk down over the South Downs and that sort of thing. If that's your bag and doing those sorts of activities interests you, I do recommend that you go to that link and find a group local to you. And if there isn't one, then to start one and to engage with people who think in a similar way, and that you can talk to openly and honestly about these things if you feel trapped in the other areas of your life in common discourse. And it's also a great place to learn new skills, make new friends, and also to speak candidly. So there you go. That's my sort of spiel on the Basket Weavers. I know that we have active groups, very active groups in Cardiff, in Bristol, in London, South Yorkshire needs one, but we've got ones in America and other places and parts of the world as well. And I think this week it's my speech is going up on Lotus Eaters as well, so hoping to get a good chunk of people who are interested in it across as well to start some new groups as well. So that would be greatly appreciated if you could check that out. It's all explained through unpopular.academy/basket weaving. I do just want to go through the super chats before we end. So Jesus Fried Christ says #rock gang with 3 rock emojis. Cabal prevails with a picture of a wizard. Thank you, Jesus Fried Christ, referencing both Harry and Gladive, who we've not seen in a while, and Oozaloo there. Hagnar the Viking says Anglicans are the biggest cowards I've ever seen, and the GOP just let an election get fortified. Kick them out. They refuse to submit. All in caps. This is the trouble. I'm not a revolutionary in that way. I consider myself probably a radical in a sense that I want to do radical things. I want to be active in the world, and I want to...
You do like black pudding with your...
I do like black pudding with my English breakfast, but...
that is fairly radical.
By radical, I mean I'm interested in starting movements in the real world that do real things with real people, and Basket Weavers, for instance, is one of those things where, I think building essentially what is a voting bloc, and also enabling particularly young right-wing men, but it's open to everyone, who are struggling with this sort of sense of self and identity and community, to help build those local communities and take the focus away from sort of globalism and nationalism. It's so much internationalism, I should say, so much in favour of Like, what can you actually do in your real life rather than just being mad on the internet all the time, or frustrated at these things? How can you defend your local community? You know, look at the murder of Sir David Amess, and say something along the lines of, how do I ensure that never happens in the community that I'm a part of? And if you don't have a community that you're a part of, then that's something that you need to give some serious thought to, because at the end of the day, when you're getting older, your connections and your friends and your networks and your community are really something which matters an awful lot. And I'm sure you can attest to that. You know, friends and family are much more important than rank punditry, Britisher. I hope that you would agree with me there.
Yes, I think it's a matter of, you know, having priorities, and not just living online.
Indeed. So that's my thought on that. In terms of getting politicians out, etc., at the rate that they're going, they will destroy themselves. You've got to work out where the line you'll draw in the sand is going to be with regards to your local community, and what freedoms you're willing to give up, because no society lives without some restriction of freedoms.
I think it's also important to realise that there are certain sort of wider trends, you know, that don't abate over time. But there are also trends that kind of come and go. So, you know, we're no longer in the era of banning video nasties, albeit, you know, listening to some, one would think they want to bring it back. But you know, these things at times wane. So one of the things I thought was worth pointing out is, you know, what's they called? Stonewall, the gay campaign group.
Yep.
I mean, there is no way of saying that things are still the same as they were a few months ago in the case of Stonewall. So they have passed their zenith, if you know what I mean. They're on the way down. You know what? It appears that sort of the organisations and government departments and whatever have begun to wake up to the fact that they're being ruled by these people, and that one has to distance oneself. And they're all pulling out of these sort of championship programs with Stonewall and whatever. And I also do feel that there are, you know, sort of green shoots of things changing. This doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the most stalwart Tories will get exactly what they want, but I think we are more than likely seeing the beginnings of the end, or the end of the beginning, if you know what I mean, when it comes to this whole woke stuff. That certain things are changing, and as I say, when you've got a few decades under your belt, you realise that these things sort of come and wane. And
I am curious to see where it goes.
I think the key is, when they have waned, we need to make sure that we then actually do kill them off, which, for example, didn't happen with 1970s feminism. So the militant feminists, they were no longer in the news. They had, to all intents and purposes in the public discourse, they had gone away. But what none of us realised is that they were no longer front page news, but Germaine Greer was now Professor Germaine Greer at university. And this is precisely how militant feminism then became the beast that birthed what we now have, this entire woke culture. It married with various other poisonous entities out there. You know, one would like also to point to Mary Whitehouse and things like that. This nature of campaigning and whatever was learned. But this means that if wokeness does slowly begin to wane, don't then think, oh, it's over, that's done with. Because that's what we thought with the militant feminism having died. And then it spawned this.
You must be wise to it, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, when it wanes, which I think it invariably will, and I think we are seeing it wane slowly, gradually. We're seeing things happen that seem to indicate that they're no longer growing; they're shrinking. And when that happens, then I think we have to,
we need to.
That's when we have to have the fortitude to say, okay, now they no longer have a grip on society. Fine. Now we have to get them out of the universities.
We need to see where they attempt to consolidate power and then undermine that, essentially, because they will. And it's also a question of whether or not a more radical element takes over. You look at what was her name, Kathleen Stock, the University of Sussex professor, who is winning at the moment her court case about whether or not she should keep her job after being trans exclusionary or whatever. But it is true that the majority of the student body, say, in that university, and a number of the staff there, are taking out Kathleen Stock because she doesn't follow their orthodoxy, which is now predominant in that university.
We had, what was he called, the professor chap who's a lord these days. Isn't he in medicine, I think? And he was on BBC Question Time and completely stood behind her. And you know how selective BBC Question Time can be as to who they bring on and how many Brexiteers they have on and whatever. So you have the feeling that even at the BBC, things are thawing. So much so that one would have someone like him on, saying, this is completely reprehensible. It's not acceptable.
I think you're more optimistic than I at the moment. I think things are going to get
when it came to Stonewall and whatever. Isn't it actually a BBC podcast that has been creating a lot of sort of trouble in that regard as to how much power Stonewall had and influence had in the BBC and whatever.
I think it
does.
I think it was an independent review that the BBC has then realised that they cannot come down on the wrong side of, and therefore have run with it and thrown Stonewall under the bus. So, but yes.
But what I mean is, didn't the government appoint a new, was it chair or was it chief executive of the BBC and whatever, and he was seen as a conservative? But at the time, including myself, everybody felt, look, what can he do? The entire institution is rife. But you just wonder if the wider if sort of the wider scene is slowly pulling away from this.
We shall have to see.
Maybe even at the BBC things can happen.
We shall have to.
Although I'm not holding my breath. And I think these oil tankers take a long time to turn round. But I just don't think that this stuff is here to stay forever and ever, and thus the only way we can rid ourselves is by taking up arms and having a revolution. I think you have to kind of understand that at times these ludicrous things spring up, but they also disappear again. But one has to have the fortitude to actually then stay on it and still kick Mary Whitehouse even when she's gone, and not allow people to sneak back in saying, no, it wasn't really that bad, because that's exactly what's going to come if we ever get rid of the woke. Then they're going to be back 10, 20 years later saying, no, this trans stuff, no, this wasn't bad at all. People make much too much out of it. I just basically say, yes, be wise to it and realise that once the dragon is weakened, we also have to have someone looking like David Amess in that knight outfit to then put it to the sword.
We shall have to see, won't we? Hagnar the Viking also says, return to history and crush the barbs and make them kneel to your civilized culture or deport them back to Barbar land. To be perfectly honest, I don't see anything particularly wrong with that. As long as we were talking about crushing in a cultural sense.
I would look to basically the minority itself to
Yes.
basically incentivize the minority itself in such a manner that the moderates then start telling those people who are still running around in full niqab that they either have to start getting with the program or they ought to perhaps better leave.
You need to make it so that they have to take action and they can't just, as you say, moan at BBC Question Time and then feel the catharsis from that and, oh yeah, you should be more accepting of us. Like, as long as when people get to the point of, a bit like France, really, where you just go, that's not going to fly anymore. You just need to sort this out and sort it out quickly because otherwise that's it. You know, you deserve what you get at this point unless you can fix this, and then you'll find that things start to move quite very, very quickly. In the interest of time, Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker says, "You just say your account was hacked." But you could say that at the moment, Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker. But they'll try their best. That, you know, these people who go out there and they go, well, you know, you tweeted this at 10:30 p.m. on a Friday night after you've been out at the pub, you know, can you verify your whereabouts? Unless you can prove that it was hacking, we're going to assume it was you, etc. You know, you would need to find proof of a hack that happened at the time. So I don't think that's an adequate defense to say that. Right, so thank you very much to everyone for watching tonight. I appreciate that it was both a very comical stream in many ways, because we had the very light-hearted first half followed by a very dark,
grim second half.
A very grim second half. But I hope that you've had the best of both worlds, as it were, talking about the elements of today and a little bit of British culture as well. And I hope that all of you have a fantastic week ahead. Thank you ever so much to everyone who donated. Especially, as I say, thank you to Hagnar for making such a generous donation, and we will see you next week. And if you're interested, I will be around tomorrow on Unpopular Opinions on the Academic Agents channel. Have you got anything in particular you want to shill the week that was, that sort of thing?
No, I'm fine for now. Cheers.
Marvellous. Thank you very much to everyone. Take care and have a great week.